There is a silence that the chosen one carries that the world has never been able to properly name. It is not the silence of defeat, not the silence of someone who has run out of words or run out of hope, not the silence of a person who has given up and retreated into the grey numbness of a life half-lived. No, this is a different kind of quiet altogether, the kind that hums with an almost unbearable pressure from the inside, the kind that feels like standing at the edge of a vast and thunderous waterfall, but hearing nothing because the roar has somehow become part of your own heartbeat. You have felt it lately, haven't you? That strange, weighted stillness that has settled over your days like a thick velvet curtain being drawn slowly across a window you didn't even know was open. Something in your spirit knows that this is not an ordinary season. The atmosphere around your life has shifted in ways that your natural eyes cannot fully document. But every cell in your body registers the change, the way animals register the trembling of the earth before the ground ever splits open. Heaven is moving in your name right now, not casually, not in passing, with intentions so surgical and so precise that the enemy has already picked up the frequency and begun to mobilize. And the very first weapon that was sent against you was not aimed at your finances, not aimed at your health, not aimed at your relationships. It was aimed at your tongue. Because they know, and now you must know too, that the most dangerous thing you can do in a season of divine transfer is to speak too soon, celebrate too loudly, and explain too freely to people who were never written into the blueprint of what heaven is building. You won't defeat this attack alone. Breaking these emotional hexes requires a higher code, which is exactly why I just released the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, whose unlocking link is in the pinned comment. Access it before the fog blinds you again, because what is happening to you right now is not coincidence, and it is not confusion. It is the opening movement of a war that was always going to precede your greatest promotion. Consider the dream that visited you recently, the one where you were running and your legs would not cooperate, the one where every muscle was engaged, every instinct was firing, and yet the ground beneath your feet had turned to something between concrete and water, heavy and resistant and completely indifferent to your effort. You woke from it gasping, or perhaps with that hollow, unsettled feeling that follows you into the first hours of morning like a shadow that arrived before the sun. The dream of persecution is not merely a subconscious release valve. In the spiritual lexicon, it is a dispatch, a communication from the realm of warfare, letting your spirit know that there is active resistance against your forward movement, that something in the invisible architecture of your life has identified your trajectory and is now throwing its weight against your momentum. The physical sensation is specific, a heaviness in the lower body, a tightening in the chest that is not quite fear and not quite grief, but is somehow both at once, a fatigue that sleep does not cure. The intrusive thought that follows is equally specific. What if I am not actually moving forward? What if I am fooling myself? What if the promise I have been holding is nothing more than the product of my own desperate imagination? This is not your voice. This is the voice of a monitoring spirit that has been assigned to your disruption, and it speaks in the first person, so you will believe it belongs to you. The spiritual action happening beneath this dream is a tribunal of obstruction, a council of darkness sitting in deliberation over the assignment that heaven has placed on your life, calculating the precise angle of resistance that will be most effective against your particular personality and your particular wound history. But here is what the dream is also telling you. Beneath the weight of the legs and the terror of the stillness, you are still moving. Even when the enemy slows you to what feels like a complete stop, the divine engine underneath your life does not stall. It is building compression. It is storing momentum. The primitive memory this dream reaches back to activate is the earliest experience you had of trying and being blocked, of reaching and being denied, of running and being held. and the enemy is trying to use that ancient wound as a psychic anchor to keep you emotionally rooted in a defeat that never actually defined you. But you survived that first obstruction. You survived every obstruction after it. And the roots that grew in you through each one of those buried seasons of resistance are the very roots that will hold you upright when the weight of your blessing finally arrives above ground. Now let the scene shift slightly, because the warfare against the chosen one does not always announce itself in nightmares and heaviness. Sometimes it arrives wearing a smile. Sometimes it comes gift-wrapped in the language of admiration and clothed in the warmth of someone who has known your name for years. You know the moment I am describing because you have lived it more than once. You are in a conversation, and someone looks at you and says something that sounds, on the surface, like a compliment, but the air around the words is wrong. The tone carries a slight elevation that is almost imperceptible, that specific theatrical warmth that people perform when what they actually feel is the opposite of warm. The smile does not reach the eyes. The eyes, in fact, are doing something entirely different from the mouth. They are measuring. They are calculating. They are conducting an invisible audit of everything you represent, everything you have built, everything you are on the verge of becoming. The physical sensation here is a subtle chill along the back of the neck, a slight tightening in the solar plexus, a drop in energy that happens so fast it almost reads as imaginary. The intrusive thought that follows this kind of poisoned compliment is equally insidious. Maybe I am being too sensitive. Maybe I am projecting. Maybe this person genuinely means well, and I am allowing my wounds to distort my discernment. This is gaslighting operating at a spiritual frequency, using your own self-awareness against you, weaponizing your humility and your desire to see the best in people as a mechanism to keep the door open for an energy that was never meant to have access to your inner sanctuary. The spiritual action happening in moments like these is the deployment of what the ancient traditions recognized as the evil eye, not as superstition, but as a genuine transfer of envious spiritual frequency, a transmission of disruptive energy that attaches itself to the blessing field around your life and begins to generate static. The primitive memory this activates is the first time someone you loved said something kind with their mouth, while their face said something cruel with their eyes. The first time you learned that words and intentions do not always share the same address. In the psychological framework of narcissistic abuse, this is the classic praise and diminish cycle, the oscillation between elevation and subtle erosion that keeps the target perpetually off balance, perpetually seeking validation from the very source that is methodically withdrawing it. The divine promotion hidden inside this scene is the training of your discernment, the sharpening of your spiritual perception to the point where you can distinguish between genuine warmth and performed warmth with a precision that no longer requires external confirmation. The scene deepens now into territory that is more personal and more brutal, because the next attack is not about what someone says to your face. It is about what they do in the dark, behind the curtain of your absence, with the template of your identity. You have noticed it, slowly at first, in the small things. Someone beginning to use your language, to mirror your aesthetic, to replicate your patterns, to step into the exact frequency you have been quietly cultivating and present it as their own original discovery. The blatant copy is not simply the flattery that the proverb insists it is. At the spiritual level, it is an act of identity theft that operates across multiple dimensions simultaneously. On the psychological level, it is the behavior of a narcissistic personality disorder system that cannot generate authentic selfhood from within and must therefore harvest it from those whose light they have gotten close enough to study. The physical sensation here is a specific brand of disorientation, a kind of vertigo of the self, where you look at what someone else is presenting and experience the uncanny recognition of seeing yourself reflected in a mirror that is somehow claiming to be the original. The intrusive thought is devastating in its precision. Maybe I am not as unique as I thought. Maybe my vision was never mine. Maybe anything I build they will simply take and replicate and present as their own before I ever get to show the world what I was actually carrying. This thought, if allowed to take root, produces a paralysis of creative output that is exactly what the enemy designed it to produce. The spiritual tribunal that is sitting in judgment over this act of spiritual plagiarism is ancient and exacting, because there is a law written into the architecture of the cosmos that governs the illegitimate use of another soul's anointing, and the consequences of violating that law are both inevitable and proportional. What the copy carries is always a diminished version of the original, because the anointing was never transferred with the aesthetic. The frequency that makes your gift generative cannot be replicated through observation alone. It lives in the suffering that built you, in the prayers that broke you open in the middle of the night, in the obedience that cost you something the imitator was never willing to pay. The divine promotion encoded inside this particular trial is this: when others begin to mirror you, it is because heaven has made you a standard. You have become the thing that others use as a reference point for what is possible, and that is not a small thing. That is a throne posture being assigned to your life before the throne is even fully visible. At the hour when the body is most vulnerable, when the mind has finally surrendered its conscious guardianship and slipped beneath the surface of the waking world, there is a warfare that operates in the space between sleep and consciousness that your theology may not have given you adequate language to describe. You have felt the weight, a pressure on your chest that seems to arrive from nowhere, that pins you to the mattress with a force that has no visible origin, that fills the room with a thickness that your natural lungs labor to breathe through. Sleep paralysis in the spiritual understanding is not simply a neurological glitch, not simply a misfiring of the REM atonia mechanism, though the science is real. What the science describes is the physical mechanism. What the spirit reveals is the spiritual assignment operating through that mechanism. At dawn, when the veil between realms is thinnest, when the defenses of the waking mind are not yet fully operational, monitoring spirits press in to take inventory, to assess the progress of the divine transfer that is happening in your life, to gauge the strength of your spiritual infrastructure, to test the weakness points in your peace. The physical sensation is precise. The inability to move, the weight concentrated in the sternum, the sense of a presence in the room that your eyes cannot locate, but your spirit cannot deny. The intrusive thought that arrives in this state is the most primal of all human fears. I am not safe. Something is here. Something wants to interrupt me. Something knows my name for the wrong reasons. The spiritual action is real, and it is targeted. This is not random spiritual static. This is directed reconnaissance operating against a specific life, because a specific assignment has been activated that requires active resistance from the kingdom of darkness. The primitive memory this reaches back to activate is the very first moment of helplessness, the first time you are unable to protect yourself from something larger and more powerful than you, the moment that created the neural pathway of freeze and surrender that the enemy now attempts to travel every time it needs to access your fear. But here is the counter-revelation encoded inside this trial. The pressure you feel on your chest at dawn is not evidence that the enemy is winning. It is evidence that he is desperate. Desperate entities do not haunt ordinary lives. They haunt chosen ones on the edge of breakthrough, because they know that once the transfer completes, their window of interference closes permanently. There is another sign that the attack is reaching beyond the invisible realm and beginning to manifest in the material one, and it is so subtle, so easy to dismiss as coincidence or faulty wiring, that most people never connect it to the spiritual dimension of their current season. The light bulb burns out again. The device malfunctions at the precise moment you need it most. The car stalls on a morning when the timing of your delay has consequences that ripple outward into the rest of your day. The burned-out light bulb is not merely a domestic inconvenience. In the vocabulary of spiritual warfare, material interference generated by concentrated spikes of stress and oppression is a documented phenomenon, a reality that those who operate at the highest levels of spiritual authority recognize as the physical residue of an invisible battle. The human nervous system, when placed under sustained spiritual and psychological pressure, generates an electromagnetic field disruption that is measurable, that is real, that interacts with the electrical and electronic systems in its immediate environment. When you are carrying a divine assignment of significant magnitude, and when the opposition against that assignment reaches a peak of intensity, the friction between the spiritual forces in contention around your life can and does produce material manifestations. The physical sensation that accompanies this is a kind of brittle, frayed aliveness, a feeling that everything around you is on the verge of breaking down, that the seams of your daily life are being tested for weakness. As I teach heavily and deeply to those who arrive at the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, I've already left the link for you in the pinned comment. This weight on your chest is just a symptom, and symptoms are not sentences, they are signals, and signals always point back to a source that can be addressed at the root. The intrusive thought that the burned-out bulb produces is one of the most dispiriting in the entire catalogue of spiritual warfare. Maybe everything I am trying to build is just going to keep falling apart. Maybe the universe is telling me that this is not meant for me. Maybe the constant resistance is a message I have been too stubborn to receive. This is the enemy's masterwork of deception, using the material consequences of his own attack as apparent evidence against your calling. The spiritual tribunal sitting over this particular act of sabotage is weighing the deliberate exploitation of your exhaustion, the calculated use of your accumulated fatigue, as a lever to make you question the validity of the very assignment you were built to carry. The divine promotion hidden inside the season of material disruption is this. Every system that breaks in this season is a system that was not built to carry the weight of what is coming. What is being stripped away is infrastructure that would have failed under the load of your next level anyway. The burning out is not destruction, it is renovation. Heaven is upgrading the house before moving in the furniture. You know the silence of a room that has just been entered by someone who carries envy the way other people carry a briefcase. You have sat in a gathering, a family dinner, a work meeting, a casual social event, and felt the energy of the room shift the moment a specific person walked through the door. Not a loud shift, not a dramatic one. Something quieter and more disturbing than that, a kind of tightening in the atmosphere, a slight drop in the collective warmth of the space, a feeling that the air itself has become slightly more difficult to breathe. The silence in the room when envy enters is not your imagination. It is not your projection. It is your spirit's atmospheric intelligence responding to a genuine spiritual frequency that has just entered the shared space and is already radiating its assignment. The physical sensation is a mild but persistent tension in the shoulders, a slight constriction in the throat, an almost imperceptible urge to leave or to make yourself smaller, or to stop speaking mid-sentence about anything that might sound like progress, or abundance, or joy. The intrusive thought that this produces is an elegant piece of spiritual sabotage. I should tone this down. I should not let them see that things are going well. I should dim myself enough to fit back inside the container of who they need me to be in order for this relationship to feel safe. This is the enemy using your love and your loyalty as a mechanism to keep you in a state of strategic smallness. to keep you performing a diminished version of yourself for the comfort of people whose spiritual assignment to your life is ultimately one of limitation and not liberation. The spiritual action happening in a room saturated with envious energy is the transmission of a frequency designed to interrupt the alignment between your soul and its divine assignment, to introduce enough dissonance into your internal atmosphere that the clarity of your hearing from heaven becomes temporarily clouded. The primitive memory this activates is the first time you learn to make yourself smaller to protect someone else's comfort. The first time you understood that your fullness was threatening to someone you loved, and that love required you to compress yourself to maintain the relationship. In the framework of narcissistic abuse, this is the dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat, the systemic training of one person to diminish themselves for the emotional regulation of another who has never developed the internal resources to manage their own pain. The divine promotion encoded in this atmospheric test is the development of what the great contemplative traditions call spiritual sovereignty, the ability to enter any room, carry any atmosphere, withstand any envious frequency, and remain fully and unapologetically present in the wholeness of your assignment without shrinking, without apologizing, without performing your smallness as a gift to someone who was never entitled to receive it. The betrayal that undoes you most completely is never the one that comes from an enemy. You knew about the enemy. You had your defenses calibrated for the enemy's approach. The betrayal that reaches the deepest chambers of your trust and leaves the most indelible damage is the one that comes from the Judas, sleeping in the same tent, breathing the same air, eating at the same table, praying what appeared to be the same prayers. The unexpected betrayal is a wound so specific in its architecture that it has its own spiritual taxonomy, its own place in the record of your soul's testimony. Because it does not merely hurt you, it rewrites the operating software of your relational system in ways that affect every connection that comes after it. The physical sensation of this kind of betrayal is visceral and immediate, a sensation in the stomach that is beyond nausea, a kind of internal collapse that makes the floor feel uncertain beneath your feet, a ringing in the ears that is the body's attempt to process an input that exceeds the normal parameters of relational pain. The intrusive thought is the one that will follow you into every new relationship, every new alliance, every new season of collaborative trust, if you do not address it at the root. I cannot trust anyone. Everything that looks like loyalty is just loyalty that hasn't been tested yet. Every inner circle is just an outer circle that doesn't know it yet. This thought, weaponized by the enemy and anchored in the genuine pain of genuine betrayal, becomes the invisible ceiling on every future relationship, the spiritual glass wall that keeps you contained inside the loneliness of a self-protective isolation that was built for your protection but becomes your prison. The spiritual tribunal sitting over the soul of the one who committed this betrayal is convened with an understanding of covenant that is both ancient and exacting, because in the heavenly architecture there is a law governing the violation of spiritual trust between chosen ones that carries consequences across lifetimes. The primitive memory this wound reaches back to activate is the earliest experience of having your trust exploited by someone who should have been safe, the moment that first introduced the concept of the hidden face, the person whose private agenda operated in direct contradiction to their public presentation of loyalty. The divine promotion encrypted inside the experience of betrayal is one of the most counterintuitive gifts that heaven ever packages in suffering. The Judas in your story was not assigned to destroy you. The Judas in your story was assigned to relocate you. Every person who betrayed you moved you out of an alignment that was too small for the season that was coming. And the pain of their leaving was the cost of admission to the next and more accurate chapter of your assignment. Your dog growled at him before you ever had a reason to. Your cat disappeared into the back bedroom the moment she walked in. The animal in your home registered something that your heart, still covered in the protective gauze of hope and affection, had not yet allowed itself to acknowledge. The reacting animal is not a minor detail in the theater of your spiritual life. It is one of the most reliable instruments of discernment that heaven placed in your domestic environment, a living sensor operating on a frequency of perception that exists below the range of human social conditioning, below the range of the politeness training that teaches you to override your instincts in the interest of not making a scene. Animals do not have the capacity for the sophisticated social calculus that allows human beings to talk themselves out of what they are sensing. They respond to the actual energetic signature of the entity in the room, not to the social presentation that entity has constructed over years of careful impression management. The physical sensation you experience when the animal in your home reacts to a visitor with inexplicable fear or aggression is a kind of secondary alarm, a resonance of the animal's warning that your nervous system picks up and registers as a low-grade unease that you cannot quite explain and are often tempted to dismiss. The intrusive thought that follows is the familiar one of self-doubt. I am reading too much into this. Animals react to all kinds of stimuli. I cannot base my relational decisions on the behavior of a pet. But underneath that rational voice is the older and more accurate voice of your instinct, which knew the same thing the animal knew the moment the frequency entered the room. The spiritual action that the animal is responding to is the presence of what some spiritual traditions call a spiritual parasite, a person who has developed, whether consciously or unconsciously, the capacity to draw sustenance from the energetic and spiritual resources of others without contributing equivalent energy in return, what the contemporary spiritual vocabulary calls an energy vampire. The primitive memory this activates is the first time you ignored an instinctual warning and paid the price for the ignoring, the first time your gut spoke clearly and your mind overruled it, and the consequence of that override wrote itself onto the ledger of your experience in a way that still informs your current relationships. The divine promotion hidden inside the testimony of the reacting animal is this: heaven gave you living instruments of discernment and placed them in your immediate environment, and the invitation of this season is to begin trusting what your whole being already knows, rather than continuing to privilege the voice of social comfort over the voice of spiritual clarity. You were staring at nothing in particular when the clock caught your attention, 11:11. Or you woke from a restless sleep and reached for your phone in the dark and the numbers read 3:33. Or you glanced at the odometer and the miles displayed were a perfect numerical symmetry that stopped you mid-breath. You have been noticing these patterns with an increasing frequency that feels deliberate, that feels like a conversation happening across the membrane between the visible and invisible, that feels less like coincidence and more like correspondence. The numerical coincidence is not the product of confirmation bias alone, though confirmation bias is real, and the enemy will use your rational mind to dismiss the message if you allow him to. In the architecture of the universe, numbers carry resonance, carry frequency, carry encoded meaning that operates as a navigational signal for the soul that is aligned with its assignment. The physical sensation that accompanies these numerical synchronicities is a quickening in the chest, a sudden expansion of awareness, a brief but unmistakable sense of being seen by something vast and intentional, of being located on a map whose coordinates are being confirmed in real time. The intrusive thought that the enemy sends in response to these moments of divine correspondence is a particularly sophisticated one. This is magical thinking. This is the desperate mind of someone in pain, manufacturing meaning from random data to avoid confronting the reality that nothing is guiding or protecting them. This is the enemy using the intellectual framework of scientific materialism as a spiritual weapon against your discernment. Because if he can make you dismiss the navigational signals that heaven is transmitting, he can successfully isolate you from the real-time guidance that would otherwise allow you to make the decisions that accelerate your divine assignment. The spiritual action behind the numerical pattern is the activation of what the ancient traditions called the witness of the cosmos, the understanding that the created universe itself participates in the testimony of heaven's intention over the lives of those who are aligned with their calling. The primitive memory this activates is the first time you felt genuinely guided, the first time something happened that was too precise to be accidental, the first time the universe spoke to you in a language that bypassed your rational filter and landed directly in the knowing place at the center of your chest. The divine promotion encrypted inside the numerical correspondence is the development of a navigation system that is independent of human opinion, independent of external validation, independent of the approval or confirmation of anyone who was not written into your assignment. Heaven is speaking to you in code because the message it carries is meant only for you, and a code that only you can read is a code that only you can misuse. You cross the finish line. Maybe it was a contract that finally signed, a deal that finally closed, a goal that finally materialized after months or years of invisible labor and sustained obedience. Maybe it was the healing that finally broke through the wall of your body's long resistance, or the relationship that finally resolved in the direction of justice, or the opportunity that finally opened in the door that had been sealed against you for so long that you had almost stopped knocking. You achieved it. You arrived, and in the first moment after the arrival, when the champagne should have been fizzing and the room should have been full of the specific sound of people who love you, celebrating what your faithfulness has produced, there was instead a silence so complete and so lonely that it almost undid you more thoroughly than the struggle had. The solitary victory is the final scene in the first movement of this particular spiritual education, and it is perhaps the most disorienting of all the signs because it arrives wearing the face of the thing you worked for and yet delivers an experience that feels nothing like what you imagined the arrival would feel. The physical sensation is a paradoxical one. The relief of completion existing simultaneously with the ache of having no one in the room who truly understands the weight of what just ended, the magnitude of what just began. The intrusive thought that accompanies this experience is one of the cruelest in the catalogue. If no one is here to witness this, did it even matter? If the room is empty, am I sure it was real? If I cannot share this moment, was the winning worth the cost? This thought, if internalized, becomes the foundation of a future pattern of oversharing, of anxious announcement, of the desperate need for external witnessing that makes you vulnerable to exactly the wrong audience at exactly the wrong moment. The spiritual action beneath the solitary victory is this. Heaven intentionally designs certain arrivals to be private, because the celebration of certain breakthroughs requires a purity of reception that the presence of